Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our nation's capital. I would like to begin our GovTravels meeting this morning by asking you to please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you all. Please be seated. Again, good morning, and thank you for attending our second annual gathering of travel and transportation professionals from the private sector and from the federal and state governments. My name is Mark Busby. I am president of NDTA, and I will serve as Master of Ceremonies for this meeting. For those of you who were here last year for our first meeting, I welcome you back. Great to see you all again. For those of you who are attending for the first time, we're so glad to welcome you and pleased to have you as part of the over 400 people that have signed up and to attend here, which is a huge, vast jump over last year's. So thank you all for your support. We really appreciate that. Our stated goal over the next 2 days of GovTravels is simple: to promote communication amongst all the shareholders, government and private sector, whose job it is to support the safe and efficient travel of government travelers. Requirements, needs, capabilities, policies, trends, issues, and innovations, you'll hear all of that over the next 2 days. We have worked very hard over the past year to incorporate many of the things that you told us you liked or wanted us to see included, and to get rid of some of the things that just didn't work. As always, your feedback is really important to us, and we do want to hear it. We are still relatively early in the process of building this forum into a lasting entity that serves this community well. So please do be a part of building this legacy. One big change from last year is that we now have a government co-sponsor for GovTravels. The Defense Travel Management Office has agreed to come on board with us and has signaled their desire to use this forum as a primary means to execute their responsibility to coordinate and communicate with industry. And so it gives me great pleasure to introduce my co-host, Mr. Bill Mansell, Director of the Defense Travel Management Office, to the podium to offer his welcome. Bill?
Thank you, Admiral Busby, and good morning, GovTravels. So let me first acknowledge our distinguished guests from the government sector who are here or will be here during the next 2 days. First, there's Jonathan Mostowski, Acquisition Strategist for the Defense Digital Service, an agency team of the U.S. Digital Service. Tim Burke, OMB's government-wide category executive for travel and lodging and director of the Travel and Transportation Services for GSA's Federal Acquisition Service. Gary Rassicott, acting deputy administrator and chief of operations, Transportation Security Administration. And William H. Booth, director, Defense Human Resources Activity. So for those who may not be familiar, the Defense Travel Management Office serves as the single focal point for commercial travel within the Department of Defense. DTMO establishes strategic direction, develops travel policy, maintains central oversight for commercial travel management, conducts allowance and entitlement program management, customer support and training, and DoD travel charge card program management. In addition, it is also responsible for the functional oversight of the defense travel system. So at about $8 billion annually, we are responsible for about 60% of the federal government's travel spend. The enormity of that number really began to sink in soon after I assumed my position as director of the DTMO in October. In my first few days as director, my staff presented me with one of my first decision briefs, whether or not to co-sponsor GovTravels. So as you can imagine, that decision was very easy for me. Because industry is actively engaged and we are able to exchange ideas, explore new technology, solutions, and learn about travel trends and study best practices, it was really a no-brainer. So my answer was clearly yes, we want to co-sponsor GovTravels. And so why exactly am I sponsoring GovTravels? Why did I agree to that? Why did I feel it was important for DoD to do this? Well, first, we see it as an opportunity to gain a better understanding of the challenges facing travel managers across the federal government and the travel agency. GovTravels provides a relevant backdrop to help us inform the strategic direction of the defense travel enterprise as we consider new technologies and adopt applicable industry best challenges. It also helps us to further our strategic goals to maximize travel policy understanding, improve the delivery of travel services, and optimize cost-effective travel for Department of Defense. And finally, it syncs with one of our strategic initiatives, which is very important to me, and that is to assess and strengthen our stakeholder engagement strategy. So toward that end, one way we can strengthen our stakeholder engagement is to take a more active role in NDTA's Passenger Travel Services Committee. I co-chair the PTSC, and after my first meeting yesterday, I firmly believe that it will provide a regular forum to advance relationships between the government and all segments of the travel passenger industry, and at the same time elevate our collaboration to new levels. Further, I envision the PTSC as an incubator to explore new initiatives and industry best practices to enable government to better adapt to the changing industry landscape and to more quickly achieve our strategic goals and objectives. So in concluding, let me just say that we look forward to co-sponsoring this event next year and furthering our relationship with each of you and your organizations. So in closing, I welcome you to GovTravels. I look forward to meeting many of you over the next few days, and thank you for your participation.
Thanks, Bill, and thanks to all of your hardworking staff who have collaborated so closely with my staff to put this meeting together. The topics to be discussed today and tomorrow have been developed in discussions amongst a representation of key government and industry stakeholders during the last several months. I hope that we have chosen well, and the fact that the agenda was at least interesting enough to get you here in DC is a first good sign. And thankfully the weather has held out here at the end of February. Before I go a step further, let me acknowledge the generosity of our top platinum sponsors: Amtrak, BCD Travel, Carson Wagonlet, Sato Travel, Concur, Sabre, and Travelport, and all of our other valuable sponsors who have signed on as support for this year's GovTravels. Thanks to you all for your support and faith in what we are trying to accomplish here this week. We could certainly not have done it without you. Please join me in thanking them. Before I ask our first speaker to come to the stage this morning, I'd like to offer a few administrative details for your edification. Safety first. Exits for this room are through the doors you came in here. On my right, your left. Once clear of this room, there are exits from the building immediately off the foyer, either up the escalator and out the lobby front doors, or on the doors on either end of the big glass wall that you see out there at the end of the expo area. All of our social activity, our breaks, our meals, our receptions will all be hosted in the expo area of the foyer. Restrooms are located just off the foyer, kind of back in that direction. After this afternoon's sessions, I invite you to linger just a little while longer in the foyer and enjoy an end-of-the-day President's Reception, which will start at 4 p.m. At tomorrow's reception, we will be conducting a raffle of some really nice prizes. I think there's over 30 prizes, including 2 round-trip air tickets to South Africa, courtesy of South African Airways. Please stop by our raffle booth in the expo area. It's located right by the foot of the escalator. Tickets are $5 each, but if you complete your exhibitor passport, which all of you should have received, by visiting each one of the vendors and receiving a stamp on their particular area, you'll get 2 free tickets. So if you don't have your passport, please stop by the registration desk or our ticket desk and get your passport so you can get your opportunity to be there. The drawing, as I said, will occur tomorrow about 4:30 or so, once the reception gets going. And I will draw the ticket for the round-trip grand prize as the very first ticket. So everybody has an equal shot at getting that prize. And your ticket needs to be here to win. Obviously, we'd love to have you to physically be here, but at least your ticket needs to be here to win. And if you haven't discovered it yet, yes, we do have Wi-Fi, and you're going to want to use the Hilton_meeting selection, and then use the password, all caps, NDTA 2017, exclamation point. 17, sorry, what did I say? Okay, sorry, 2017. 17, got it. What it says up there. This technical stuff, I don't know. We also have an app for the meeting. Again, this year is the ability to ask questions using your mobile device. If you've not already done so, download the app and please let your fingers do the talking. Here's a slide that should help you get there. Dan Sulka, who's sitting right up front here. Dan, stand up. Again, this year, he has his iPad, and he's going to be collecting your questions as they come in. He'll see them, and you can either stand up at the mic and ask a question of any of our speakers or our panel if you'd like, or if you'd rather just stay seated and send your question in. Dan will collect those, and then he will stand up and ask the questions for you. But we do encourage you to ask away, and we've found that we've used it now in 2 of our forums, and it's been extremely successful, and we've never had a problem with getting questions in that manner. So I encourage you to please do that. So armed with this information, I know that you're going to find the next 2 days informative and productive, so let's get to it. We settled on our theme for this conference, optimizing for smarter travel, given the significant change that is occurring in travel management practices and technologies that in many cases is outpacing policy. The huge effort to overhaul government travel regulations and automate many of the functions still lags the commercial industry and the way most people travel these days. I know many of you live this dream every day. Our first speaker is eminently qualified to discuss the challenges that he has seen from working these issues from his position in the U.S. Digital Service. For those of you who are asking, what the heck is that? The U.S. Digital Service is a startup at the White House, founded by President Obama in August of 2014 to bring together the best technology, design, and government talent. Their mission is to deliver better government services to the American people through technology and design. I'm certain that he'll talk more specifically about it when he and his colleagues are on the stage. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Jonathan Mostowski, Acquisition Strategist, Defense Digital Service and Agency Team of the U.S. Digital Service. Jonathan.
Thank you. Okay. Do I click or will it click? Do I have a clicker? Or? Okay. Okay, and the mic is working, great. So my name is Jonathan Mostowski. I work at the Digital Service, as you just heard, and my title, according to the Department of Defense Digital Service, is Bureaucracy Hacker. That is our outward-facing way to say my job is to get shit done. Those who know me know I'm very direct, and I usually don't dress so nice, so this is for you. I appreciate you all being here. Travel modernization, while it was never a thing I thought was going to be a big part of my life, has been a big part of my life for the last 2 years almost, and it's been a really interesting and rewarding experience, believe it or not, thanks to a lot of the folks that are actually, I see sitting in the front row, those that I can see. Okay, so the way this is going to go is I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm going to talk a little bit about travel, a little bit about the digital service, the various structures that we are and what we do. Then I'll get into the good, the bad, and the ugly of travel modernization from my personal perspective. I will try to finish up as early as possible so you guys can ask me all sorts of questions, and you won't hurt my feelings. I love when a question's too hard to answer. It means I need to think about it some more. So a little bit about myself. So I told you what I do right now. I actually am employed by OMB, the United States Digital Service. As you just heard, that was founded by the president in response to a technological failure, if you will, which was the launch of the healthcare.gov website. You may have heard of that. In response to that, the president and his CTO, Todd Park, at the time, reached out to private industry, specifically Mikey Dickerson, brought him together with about 11 other industry-minded folks, and they crashed on fixing the healthcare.gov website, and from that they decided, well, maybe there's other areas of the federal government where technology isn't working like it should. Turns out they were right. So I'll get into a little bit more of that in a moment, but first, let's look at this. Government travel systems are not good. Everybody gasp. You did not know this. One of our ethos at the Digital Service is to find the truth and tell the truth, and I know I just blew your minds. The reality is technology in the federal government is not very good. And the reason for that is because most of the technology that we create doesn't have competition. And competition is really what drives things to be better. And there's all sorts of reasons in the way we implement things that they are the way they are. But the reality is we get things out that work. As far as government systems go, our travel systems are probably on the better end, believe it or not. They actually work. People can actually do what the system is supposed to do, however painful as it might be. But it works. They get to travel. They get reimbursed, usually, in a time-friendly way. So why is it such an issue? Why am I here, and why are you all sitting out there? Well, the reality is travel systems are one of those things that we use in the government and then we use in our personal life, and it's really obvious when one doesn't work. And this is a pain point that's especially fielded by folks that are in like the reserves. You know, they come to work 1 weekend a month and they use this travel system for their travel, and then they go back to their companies, not just their personal travel, and do company travel. And it works perfectly fine. And then they come back here and they're like, what does this mean about me? What does this mean about my employer? How important is my time to them? So that's what we're going to talk about today, how to fix that. So the digital service. By the way, I should mention I never do slides. This was dressing up and doing slides was for you guys. So as I mentioned, about 12 individuals got together and started looking at what was going on in technology in the federal government. And fortunately for me, I was not an industry outsider. I was a contracting officer at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency for 13 years. I am a self-described FAR nerd, where most of my counterparts are what we call tech nerds. I think I've graduated to tech nerd in their eyes, but anyway, so you know, I love acquisition, I love procurement, I love fixing things. That's kind of how I got into that bureaucracy hacking area. So as the digital service team got brought together, we realized there's more and more problems. Eventually, the edict came out that we'd be at all 24 cabinet agencies. That has not happened. But we did grow from that 12 to 200. We are at 4 agencies, and we describe having an agency franchise team as having 3 things. An official charter with the secretary of the agency, a lead that was hired through our hiring pipeline, and one member of the staff that was brought in by the agency to work on that specific team, and then it goes from there. We also have other arrangements with other agencies that are slightly less formal, but we have 4 literal ones, and one of you will probably ask me to name the 4 of them, and I'm going to stall while I try to think of all of them. But DoD is one. So anyway, so we have gone out to these agencies, and I'll explain a little bit of how we got here. So before DDS, Defense Digital Service, who I'm spend part of my time with, the other half of my time is with the USDS. Before they were stood up, we were the US Digital Service only, and we would go out and we would do these discovery sprints at different agencies, usually at the direction of the president, sometimes at the request of the secretary of the agency. With regard to the Department of Defense, it was both and very passionate. So it was not something to consider, it was something we were going to do, and to our surprise, we actually were asked to do 3 concurrent sprints, and we'd never done that before. So we ended up looking at the human resource system, the service treatment records, and the defense travel system, and these were specifically selected by the secretary of the agency. So if you are wondering if what you're doing is important to the secretary of the Department of Defense, it is. So I specifically led the defense travel system sprint, and out of that sprint, we made 3 recommendations. The 3 recommendations were streamline the joint travel regulations, which was about 1,300 pages. I always like to describe the joint travel regulations as this. There was a 1.5 pages of instructions on when you could take a taxi cab, the last sentence of which said, in any situation in which you feel it is appropriate to take a taxi cab, I'm paraphrasing, you can take a taxi cab. So 1.5 pages of information to basically tell you if you need to take a cab, take a cab. So streamline the joint travel regulations, implement a COTS, or a commercial off-the-shelf travel solution, SaaS, software as a service offering, and streamline the data science, invest in the data science behind the travel system. So we spend a lot of money in DoD travel, and we need to know what that means. We need to study that, and we need to make recommendations to improve our ability to negotiate with vendors to approve or to inform how we make decisions on what travel policies are worth having and which ones only apply to the very outskirts of individuals but complex it for the rest of us. So I go and I sit down with Deputy Secretary Work and the CIO at the time, Terry Halverson, and a collection of other interested stakeholders. And I gave them this recommendation. I handed this report. I went like this, see you guys, have a great day. And they said, we love it. We want to implement these recommendations on the condition that you stay and help implement them. Yeah, so how do you say no to an offer like that? This was kind of an interesting thing because it was different than what we typically do. We don't normally just drop reports and leave, but we also don't normally stay at the request by a specific individual to do a specific project like this. So I still had my regular job at USDS, which was acquisition focused, not travel system focused. And I couldn't walk away from that. So what I agreed is I would stay on 20% of my time as sort of a strategic advisor to the really talented folks that were inside DTMO and soon to be DMDC, and essentially I'll just say PNR to make it simple, and agreed to stay on, and we began to work through this far more complex problem than I thought it was going to be. So of course, if you want to make change, you got to have vision, right? And having vision is important, but communicating vision effectively is equally, if not more important. And this was a thing that I thought I was doing very, very well until I would show up to meetings and learn that I wasn't doing it very well. So what are some examples of that? So Congress was really nice, and they gave DTMO, the Defense Travel Management Office, authority to run pilots to improve travel, to modernize travel. So that was a great place to start. So we leveraged that authority, and we decided to run a pilot to modernize the defense travel system, to implement a commercial travel SaaS solution. So the question that came up constantly, haunts me to this day, is this a pilot or is this an implementation? And the answer, are you ready, is yes, it's both, okay? Yeah, we're absolutely leveraging the pilot authority that was given to us. We are absolutely trying to implement a COTS SaaS solution. Does this mean that we are implementing this particular solution for the life of defense travel? No. But at the scale of DoD, the only way to know if we can implement a COTS solution is to scale the implementation of the COTS solution. So we need to go far and we need to go wide. So what did this look like? Well, I'm going to talk more on the next slide about culture change, but DoD generally lives in a world of forever, right? The scale of implementation is forever. The timeline is forever. And when you live in a world like that, then you can look at a problem set of like, we should define this solution to its perfectness and implement it perfectly. We could have a whole nother conversation of how successful that works, or that is, but nevertheless, that is the mentality that we take at projects. And so when I started coming into these meetings and I would say, I don't want perfect, I want iterative. Get me a traveler, get me one traveler. Almost everybody in this front row probably remembers for a while, every meeting, every phone call, every email, I would say, so how does this get us to first traveler? And then we'd have all sorts of debates of what first traveler is. But quite frankly, for me, I was okay if there was a puppet master behind the screen making all the levers, the Wizard of Oz thing work, so long as we could get travelers interfacing with the system so we could get user feedback. So we could learn, is this even the right direction? Do people think this is easier than what we already have in front of us, and is it worth pursuing? So we did get first traveler, and that was a very exciting day. And then it was, yeah, but we need end-to-end travel. See, because you can't really compare government travel to your personal travel, because when you do personal travel, all you do is you go to a website and you book your travel, you pay with your credit card, and that's sort of the end of the transaction sort of showing up. But in government travel, you have travel and expense, and that's where this thing gets hairy, right? So then it became, we need end-to-end travel, which is a person booking through the system all the way through getting reimbursed through the system, which I am also very happy to say we have achieved that for one accounting system, which we'll talk about. And then the goal is what? So the vision has remained the same, right? Scale, tall and wide. But the goals have to keep moving. You achieve them and you keep moving, or you don't achieve them and you find a new goal and you pursue that. So now I'd like to see 1,000 travelers going through the system. I would like to see more and more travelers. I'd like to see more and more complex travelers. So when I say that, we have what we've defined right off the bat, basic travel. And I'll just sort of interrupt myself to say, when I did the discovery sprint on my team, I had a senior software engineer from Facebook with me. And we reviewed the joint travel regulations, and we reviewed the software code behind the DTS system that we have in place today. And then I said, hey, Ben, can I see the Facebook travel policy? And he provided it, and I think it was 7 pages. I might be wrong, but I think it was 7 pages. 1,307. Maybe Facebook doesn't care and they're just, wildly throwing money. But I think Netflix's travel policy is 2 words. I think it's be reasonable. And it always strikes me as odd that, in the DoD, we will trust people with billion-dollar systems and, give them weapons that can kill people and send them off to actually do such a thing. But we don't trust them to be reasonable when they travel. And maybe there's good empirical evidence that we shouldn't, but it seems odd to me. But anyway, so when we took that policy and we said, well, you know what? Okay, yeah, there's a lot more complexity in travel than what Facebook deals with. But we could probably define a subset of DoD travelers that do travel much like Facebook travelers do. So we created this thing that lives today called Basic Traveler. And we're not referring to the traveler as being basic. We're referring to the type of travel they're doing as being basic. And that's essentially less than 30 days, not passing the date timeline thing, I think not even going no CONUS, at least for the beginning, civilian to non-military installation. So we did that, and I think it was like 20 pages or less. We were able to do it right away. DTMO crafted it. They're like, this is within our authority. We can write this up ourselves right now, and they did, and it was awesome. And that's the thing we've been using. So when I talk about complexity, I'm now talking about that's I keep saying basic, but now that I hear it, it sounds really offensive. That is simple travel. That's not much better. And then we have the complex travel, military to military installation over 30 days, so on and so forth. So that's what I'm talking about. Let's just move on here. So we talk about tech. We talk about modernizing the software a lot. We spend a lot of time talking about this. But as far as I'm concerned, the technology is really not the problem. We know that because the implementation that we did, we're using the Concur commercial travel and expense tool under the existing contract, and I can explain how that all worked if anybody wants to hear it. But long story short, we're using it, and that tool is used for 70% of the Fortune 500s in the United States. Okay, so we know that a technology solution exists. Why it's difficult to implement is all the things on the other slides. As you can see, my slides are very detailed. But the things we'll talk about on the other slides. And that's what makes it hard to implement. But we were able to do basic travel with that just logging in, traveling, or booking your travel and going on a trip piece rather quickly. That wasn't the hard part once we sort of got out of our own way. The question is, how do we do this? So what does technology implementation look like? Wow, yeah. I may steal some stuff from my other slides, and if I do, I'll try not to repeat them. But essentially, we've got to build the front end where you book your travel. We have to connect to an accounting system that has to connect to DFAS so the person can get reimbursed. Doesn't sound too bad, except that in DoD and most of the federal government, you have to do what's called pre-trip obligation, which is basically where you take your best guess of what your trip's going to cost, and we fence in the money so nobody else spends it, and then you go on your trip, and then you come back and you submit an actual voucher that says how much of that money you actually spent that we should actually pay out, and then that books get corrected. So that was one of the challenges. That's not something that, while the tool can support it, that's not something that's typically done. And when you start designing for the user, with the user in the center of your decisions, you really got to focus on, am I making the user's experience better or worse? So a user shouldn't have to go through that process of dealing with that pre-trip obligation if they don't have to. So we went out and we did some research, and were able to find other agencies that had set precedents of not doing pre-trip obligation. And we talked to the comptroller, and they were considered enough to give us a waiver from that process, barring some other circumstances. So we were able to move the pre-trip obligation piece out. We had to configure. You have to set the forms up with to show the right information. You know, we've got preferred lodging type stuff we have to work on. We have things that aren't on the GDS, and you guys probably know what all these words mean. But if not, let me know. So we have to work that stuff out. We have to show things in a certain order. But it's really not that difficult. Then we have to connect to an accounting system. Yeah, that shouldn't be difficult. Except that the Department of Defense has, I don't know, I say in the 30s. I hear between 20 and more accounting systems. And even they can't all talk to DFAS. So we have this cool thing called GEX, and that kind of is the translator for all of these systems. So hopefully we could just plug CTE into GEX and then we're good. But of course that doesn't work. So we had to build a little bit of middleware. I was very uneasy with this. I was hyperventilating because my whole goal through this whole thing is we're not going to write custom code, okay? The purpose of the pilot part of this statement is that we were trying to see if we can implement commercial travel practices in DoD, not conform commercial travel systems to DoD. That's what we already have, actually. The current defense travel system was written on the Jelco travel system with 20 years of custom COBOL code written on top of it. And you can just foresee that replaying itself. We could get this awesome shiny new toy, and we could plug it in, and then we could say, oh, but it doesn't accommodate this thing, and it's really important to us. Can you change it? And if we had a tool that was sure, we will change that to meet your needs, we wouldn't challenge ourselves. We wouldn't ask ourselves the hard questions, and that's the real important takeaway of all this. It's not can you do it. You absolutely can do it. It's can you do it and ask yourself the hard questions. Do we need this rule? Do we need this policy? Does this rule or this policy impact the majority of travelers, Or are we subjecting the majority of travelers to correct a problem of a very, very small minority? These are the things that we need to work out. And so as we conform and we go through, we need the software to push back on us. We need it to say, well, you know, multi-tenant cloud environment from a cost, from a sustainment, from a management and coop perspective, that's awesome. But from a DoD, we like our secret squirrel stuff kept secret squirrely, and you know, we want to be able to deal with problems when they come up in a way that makes us feel very safe and warm at night. That's not necessarily such an easy question. So this forces us to look into these. What do we want to do? How do we want to address that? And don't get me wrong, even though my answer will almost always be go with the better technology, figure out the policy on the other side, sometimes figuring out the policy is the right thing to do. This is the right answer, and we do need to make something fit that. And that's what we're actually doing right now, is we're kind of evaluating ourselves and seeing where we are. And the folks at this table are probably like, BS, he doesn't believe that. But that's true. I do believe it, I just never say it. So, modernization equals change. I've talked a little bit about culture, honestly, in everything I do. So I spend most of my time not fixing travel systems. In fact, I'm happily getting more people from DDS to help fix the travel system so it can get the DDS attention that it deserves. Because I'm off doing lots of other things. And most of what I do is try and reform procurement, primarily around the acquisition of agile development services. And it really doesn't matter. It's all the same. It doesn't matter if I'm talking to a senior procurement executive at X agency or a secretary at Y agency or a contracting officer at so on and so forth. It all comes down to culture. Okay? The gates of culture change are locked from the inside. So you can't force culture change. I've been in many agencies where the secretary has said, we will do this. I worked at one, NGA. Tish Long said, we will move to Agile. Everything will be Agile. But you can't force that. It's great to have the top level support, but you have to bring people along. It's a pull, not push. And this is the same thing. It's all the same. So here we're talking about change. So we have this organization. We have DHRA, we have DMDC, we have DTMO. These are people, and one of the things I always find, no matter what agency I go into, is the government is full of really amazing, talented, dedicated people, okay? So don't ever think, like, if you ever see us come across a project you're working on, this is a perfect example, and we start spouting off at all the things you could be doing differently, that's why we're there. But it doesn't mean that the people that are doing it aren't incredible people. What we talk about a lot, though, is you found ways to make things work in the environment you've been forced to live in. What makes DDS, what makes USDS and all the other franchises badass is not that we went out and we got Facebook and Netflix and Amazon and you pick your Silicon Valley, Austin, Boston company, and we got their talent to come work with us. Yeah, that's what gets us in the door. That's why people listen to us. But what makes us effective is we have a seat at the table. People listen to us. They let us say the things that the people that have been on the floor have been thinking and yelling into a tunnel for decades. That if we would just change this thing, we wouldn't have as many problems as we do. So our ability, our access to the directors and the secretaries and such is what allows us to make the change that we do. In this specific situation, so we had an existing task order with Northrop Grumman, and they've been delivering our defense travel system. And as I said, as far as government systems go, I mean, this thing was meeting the requirement. And we looked at the contract, and the contract actually had language in it that said, you should modernize the system. But what it didn't have was money to modernize the system, right? We weren't actually doing it. I mean, everybody thought, you could tell, whoever was involved in awarding it the last time had looked at it and said, we should modernize this thing. So they already knew. It's not like I showed up and was like, hey, did you know your travel system is a little outdated? They even came up with the same recommendation that I gave. Let's use the thing we have, and let's bring in a modernization effort. Let's move this thing into the 20th century, 21st century. A little tongue-in-cheek. But anyway, so that's what we're doing, as I mentioned. And, you know, it was interesting in the beginning, to be honest. I would love to say it was easy from day one. But as I said, our ethos is find the truth and tell the truth. It was difficult. There's some storming, there's some norming, there's some, this is the way we've always done it. This is my rice bowl. This is the way it's supposed to be. There was this one time in 1930 where this guy took a taxi cab just because he thought it was the right thing to do. So we created a rule, and then we went and got funding, and then we modified the contract so they could do an engineering change to the software and wrote custom code to allow the person who might need to take a taxi cab because they think they need to. That's what we had. That was the mindset. And so a lot of what this was just saying, why? Why do we need to do that? What if we didn't do that? And the only way that we can get stuff done at DDS or USDS or you guys in your current positions, what we have found the only way to get things done is to start small. Change one piece of one thing and prove the thing makes a difference. Okay, so DDS did this with Hack the Pentagon, you might have heard about. When we first suggested Hack the Pentagon, with that wording, with that phrasing, can you imagine what the Pentagon's response to you should hack the Pentagon was? So we spent all this money to stop them from hacking us. Now you're just going to let them. So we're like, no, don't worry about it. It's no big deal. We're going to have white hat hackers hack a public-facing web page, a thing that's getting hacked every day all the time anyway. It doesn't matter. And even if they do hack it, they might change like the P to like some dirty picture or something in Pentagon. And then, you know, that's it. So we did that, and we found all sorts of things about it. And we were able to take that and say, you know, if we had the right people looking at the right things, who knows what else we could find. And oh, by the way, industry does this all the time. And oh, by the way, hackers are doing this all the time anyway. We might as well pay them to give us the information so we can find out why we have the vulnerabilities that we do. And now we have Hack the Army and everybody wants to hack something. It's great. We're just hacking things. I'm hacking bureaucracy. Websites are getting hacked. So it's that sort of culture change that we're working at. And so that's what the travel has been, right? So let's get one traveler. You know, let's get one traveler end to end. Let's get 1,000 travelers. Let's get one military traveler to a military installation. Let's see how far this can go. Because we're going to have to ask ourselves some really hard questions if we want to move forward. So if technology isn't the problem, what is? And I do not say this to say that the policy people in DTMO are the problem. They are not. They're amazing. But the policy is definitely the part of the problem. It's probably the biggest part of the problem. Because what separates us from traveling in the private sector or traveling in your personal life is the 1,300 pages of rules. Okay? So whether it's custom COBOL code that is allowing you to implement one of these rules, or it's configuration of a commercial system, it's still difficult. It still means that, you know, because I wore a green hat that day and my right sock was longer than my left sock, I need to have this special kind of travel and I need to get reimbursed in this special kind of way. That's what makes this difficult. I will say, though, even though I say I kind of put it up there jokingly as if it's something we've been unwilling to touch, that's not true. DTMO invested rather rapidly in bringing in a surge support, and they were actually already doing it. I can't even take credit for that. I really can't take credit for any of this, just to be totally clear. Okay, none of this is me. I did make the slides, except Gary Larson made the pictures, so I can't even take that. But they were already looking into policy simplification. All we did was amplify that and get them the resources they needed to look at it faster and harder. And then we put them up against a technological solution that forced them to challenge some of the policy things that weren't just necessarily difficult policies, but they were difficult to implement. So I always reference 1,300 pages. I don't know exactly what it is anymore, but they've essentially cut it in half. And that edition or version of the JTR will be coming out, I believe, in September of this year. So I won't be able to use that number anymore, which stinks because people are like, 1,300, that's so big. I guess 650 sounds like a big number too. But anyway, but so they're working on it. They're attempting to simplify the terminology and get rid of some of the redundant language. And the big thing is, I talk about the complexity of travel. There's essentially like 168 reasons to travel. I think in my mind, when I first started, I bucketed into like 35 types of travelers, civilian, a family member of military going to military, a reservist, on duty, off duty, so on and so forth. They've managed to consolidate that down to 5 broad categories. So that's a win, right? I mean, that's incredible. And when you talk about configuring forms on the front end for all these different types of travelers, making 5 different types as opposed to 168, just to put that in content for you. So context, sorry. So anyway, so this is a thing we're working on. We're going to continue to work on it. I think DDS is going to try and get a little bit more involved now. Heads up. So we'll take a more focused look at that as well. Okay, so technology is not the problem. Policy is the problem, but we're working on it really hard. Financials. I never thought financials were going to be the problem, and I talked about this a little bit. I think from the first day I showed up, someone was like, this pre-trip obligation is really the problem. This is sort of like the way this works, right? Like somebody will this is the problem. And then I'm like, finally, I got the problem, and I go run off, and I start using all my cool access to talk to really important people, and I'm like, hey, I found the problem. I'm told if we fix this one thing, we're good. That's usually not ever the case. But pre-obligation was at one point the problem, so we took care of that. One thing I will say is definitely part of the problem, and I would love to see fixed, and I have thoughts on it. But it's all the accounting systems. I never realized that modernizing a travel system meant dealing with this gnarly beast of antiquated and somewhat modernized accounting systems that essentially all speak different languages. It's like being in an airport and trying to ask for help. Like it's just, everybody's saying something different and you don't know what to do. And like I said, I mean, we have the Bridge X, which was actually done outside of the vehicle that we're doing the modernization in. And this is just a light piece of middleware that does a bit of the translation. And we've done end-to-end travel, so we've been able to get one traveler all the way through for one accounting system. I'll just go with the number 20, even though I don't believe it. There's 19 more accounting systems that we have to do this to. What if all the money was in one accounting system? What if it was in the one we've already done? We would just be done with that problem, right? But these are big challenges. These are big, big changes. People want their money where they have control of it. Congress tells us to do certain things with the money, and DoD has made certain decisions about how they respond to what Congress has told them to do. And that's essentially what all of this comes down to. So do I think financials are the biggest problem? No. Do I think they're a major time issue? Yeah. We can do it for all of the accounting systems. We just shouldn't. It's crazy. We should probably just have a modern accounting system that actually talks to commercial software that's designed to talk to modern accounting systems, right? But maybe that's another project for another day. I think when I said that to the comptroller, he was like, oh, do you want to work on that project? It's like 20% of my time. That's it. Okay. So I promised I was going to leave a lot of time for questions, but if you don't have any questions, I can talk forever. So how's it going? It's going. One of my coworkers back at USDS would probably describe me as a roller coaster when it comes to DTS. Because I will literally walk in the office and be like, we're big on high fives there. High five, DTS. Got a big thing done today. No pre-trip obligation. And then like 5 minutes later, I'll be on the phone like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Walk by, like, DTS. So it's going. Everything is moving in the right direction. The storming and norming is behind us. The team is coalescing, and I'm talking about the collective team, not internal or external exclusively. DDS is making a real commitment now This has sort of been my, I said 20% 2 years ago, and we've had some staff roll in and out. We're actually making a bigger commitment ourselves. I think the leadership, I'll just say from DHRA down, has made a renewed commitment, not to say it was never ever not there, but a renewed commitment. And so this is gonna happen. This is working. We're gonna get through this. And what does it look like at the end? I have no idea, okay? I have no idea. I don't know if it's that we prove the hypothesis to be true or false, but we're gonna learn. We're gonna improve something, and along the way, we're gonna get users using something that is just better. I mean, we've done some user feedback on the early phases. We're getting ready to do another round of that with what we have today. But the early responses from users it's a world of difference. So before I turn it over to you guys, 4 important things. I don't want to get sued, so Gary Larson gets credit for all of the images and the funny text. It's hard, but it's definitely achievable. We're going to do this. Presuming the third bullet stays true, which is that change is a combination of vision and tenacity. And one without the other doesn't work. And vision that's not clear and repeated doesn't mean anything. And a reminder to ourselves as we work through this, that success is not the absence of failure. The difference is to fail small and fail fast and learn from it and then move forward from there. So that was like my dramatic ending. Right? So I'm going to turn it over to you if you have questions, and then it looks like we do. Great.
Actually, there's a lot of interest in the pre-trip funds obligation.
Okay.
They asked kind of a similar question 2 ways, so I'm going to combine the 2 questions. How did you take care of the pre-trip obligation challenge? What was the current purpose, and then how did you kind of work around that or repurpose it?
Yeah, so the federal government accounting and regulations require, essentially under the Anti-Deficiency Act, require the obligation of funds to be recorded at the time at which the obligation occurs. This is to prevent the invoicing for the obligation to occur, work's done, invoice occurs. This is to prevent that from happening and the money having been spent elsewhere. Okay, so think of obligation like you went into your checkbook after writing a check and deducting it from your record. Okay, as far as you're concerned, that money's gone even though the check hasn't cashed. It's especially difficult with travel because some parts of travel happen very much in advance of travel, like booking plane tickets sometimes, and some happen actually at the time of travel. And then even though the expense occurs at the time of travel, sometimes the billing occurs after the travel. So the pre-trip authorization made sense if you just looked at that piece of it. But if you kind of boil it down to what are we trying to accomplish, what we're trying to accomplish is like don't double spend. So if we could just deduct in our checkbook that money and consider that money gone, we could solve the same problem. So as is the story with everything in DTS, with regards to software, everything in DTS, is we attempted to control behavior through technology. So we've got an app for that, right? Like we write the solution into the code base to make sure that we can enforce this thing. In this particular case, we wrote the software to accommodate this pre-trip obligation to be relatively seamless from a technology standpoint. So you don't have to go into a different system. And from that standpoint, again, success. They accomplished it. The reason why it's a problem is that it's just not a necessary step for travel if you can find a simpler way to bookkeep. So what's the answer to how we did this? So there's 2 parts of it. One is the technical is a bad word. One's the implementation methodology, and the other is how do we address that anti-deficiency thing. So how do we address the anti-deficiency thing? I don't know that I have the final word on that, but my understanding, or at least was my recommendation, and I think what was taken, was we can essentially make a bulk appropriation or obligation of travel. So the department can essentially make estimates of how much travel, which they do anyway, and consider that money, obligate it, and sort of draw down to that. And that's similar to how GSA and USDA did it before us. From the how do we make sure we're not anti-deficient methodology, or the how do we put that into practice, right now we're still investigating what it will be. It could be anything from an Excel spreadsheet at each approving official or budget line level. We are looking into tools. The Concur CTE tool has something called budget expense, I think, and that is intended to do that sort of thing. We're not yet entirely convinced that's the best way for us to do it, but that's what we're investigating. So hopefully that answered the question. Happy to take a follow-up.
You said the lack of competition is one reason government systems lag behind consumer, corporate, or industry systems. How do you create competition within this, at least in the DoD or federal government, if you want to elevate it to that level?
That's a really good question. And as a contracting officer, I typically consider competition being, how do we compete amongst many of you that are out there to bring us the best solution? And of course, I do mean that as well. But the government's been doing that for a long time, and that hasn't driven the sort of excellence that I'm referring to with regards to technical competition. In large part because we award multi-year contracts to a vendor that probably proposed a system of excellence, but then over decades, that competition is no longer there. And so I'm actually referring to, forgive me, but like the government competition, right? So we are government. You will use this thing if you want to do that thing. So if you want to pay your taxes, here's the IRS. Here's the forms the IRS gives you. Fortunately, TurboTax and other companies have built things that make that easier, or you can go to a CPA, but the government has never, at least up until now, felt compelled to make an easier way for you to do taxes. We gave you all the forms. What's the problem? That's a lot of what digital service does, is we try to say, like, that's where the industry mindset comes in, is we look at it and we say, well, in industry, there's this thing called TurboTax. This is how they would do taxes if they were the IRS. Maybe we should look at approaches like that. And like a good indicator if your technology requirement or implementation is not being subjected to the sort of rigor of competition in your mind is, did you require or is there a training manual? Okay, because we all interact with really complex technology every day of our lives, every day. You get a rental car, it's got new buttons, it's new software. The last one I was in had a Wi-Fi that connected right to my phone. I didn't ask it to, that was a little unnerving, but nevertheless, like, you do this all the time. I reference TurboTax because I use TurboTax to do my taxes. This is not an endorsement of TurboTax. I use TurboTax to do my taxes, but I'm not a CPA. No one trained me. I didn't even read those little boxes that say, click here to do this thing or ask for, I don't even read them. I don't have time for that. So if I can do my taxes, and I did take business accounting, but it had nothing to do with tax law. If I can do my taxes without reading instructions, we sure as hell should be able to book travel without reading instructions, or any other government service that we offer. And so the question was, how do we create that competition? We can't, right? I mean, we're not going to create a shadow government that is going to challenge us. And we've tried the thing where we're like, we're going to do two at the same time and pick the better one, and then in reality, we just keep them both, and they're both terrible. So what we can do, though, the right answer, I said this to someone the other day, and they kind of took offense, so I'm going to say it nicer this time. But if you're writing a requirements document, and you're done, and you've spent months, and everybody's hacked on it, and you're done, you should do a word search. And if User feedback, user testing, user-centered design, user experience are not in your document, here's where I'm going to be nicer. Your document is not correct, okay? You should consider adding those words. There's lots of other words you should add, like automated testing and so on and so forth. But with regards to the specific question, design for your user. Don't build a travel system for 1,300 pages of policy. Build a travel system for the people that are going to travel, okay? Ask them if this solves their problems, and then make the policy work for them.
Well, this will be one of mine. I don't have another one queued up here yet. There's a little bit of a lag, folks. If you got them coming in, give it about 30 seconds. You mentioned that you've got merit badges both as a tech geek as well as a FAR geek.
Sure.
So let me kind of see if I can combine those two.
Okay.
You very briefly touched on one of the charters was to invest in data science behind the travel systems. So is this kind of a DARPA type approach, and do you see any of this research being shared with industry? Kind of like the invention of the internet, or
I've heard of that one. That's a good. I love that question.
Thanks.
I was so passionate about the third recommendation to the DepSec about investing in data science that I did an unprecedented thing at the digital service. I conducted a second discovery sprint on that specific thing. I will be honest, the adoption of the recommendations in that report have been not to the standard I would have hoped to see. Because the things we're doing in policy and the things we're doing in the system are really important, and we should do them. And we should do them with the tenacity that we are, and more so. However, if you're not looking at the data, then you don't know that you're making the right decisions. I'm probably going to say a thing I shouldn't say, but there's been all this discussion ever since I came into this world about CityPair. CityPair is the greatest thing in the world. CityPair is the worst thing in the world. I won't say who said these things. It definitely wasn't one person in either case. And I would just sit there and like watch the ping pong ball go back and forth of like zero facts but lots of feelings. And I would just say, where's the data? How do you know? Like, you don't even know what user application of CityPairs is to rebook travel if it's based on that's the way the government travel is because we're so squirrely on when we need to do things. That really sounds like the federal government, like we don't plan things months in advance. Or is it because we know that we can cancel a trip and my hotel breakfast was really good and I wanted to sit there for another hour and enjoy the delicious buffet eggs and I'd change my flight by an hour, okay? I probably wouldn't do that if I knew that I was gonna like have to, I don't know, I hate to say write a justification because I did it, but if I had to explain to my boss, and like that's how it is in private sector, by the way, for the most part. And I don't mean like private sector that has designed themselves to work with the federal government and largely adopted our horrible policies for some reason. I'm talking about like the real, like just the private sector wants you to be reasonable and you tell your boss you think your trip's gonna be $1,000 and you spent $1,500 because you wanted to stay and eat those delicious eggs, right? So these are the things like we need to study, and we don't have enough data scientists. I don't feel like they have enough access to the data, and I don't feel like they have the tools they need to really do something with that data. But the part of your question that I love the most is, what do we then do with that data? Do we share it? And I'd say absolutely. We should always remember as the government, yeah, we have to protect a negotiation position with industry. I'm far more interested in remembering that as the federal government, we work for the public. We should give them their data in a way they can use their data. And I would be willing to bet that, yeah, there might be some sharks out there in the world of contracting negotiation that might take advantage of things that we share. But I would be willing to bet in this day and age, there's far more people that would build things to make their government work better. And that's what we should be doing. We should make this stuff available. DDS just launched actually this week, open.mil. We're getting some interesting feedback. The open source community has lots of opinions and thoughts, believe it or not. But nevertheless, the whole purpose of this thing is to make code available, to make our code accessible by people in open source repositories, so they can either be like, this is terrible code, or look at all the things we found that we could do just by you giving us this little piece of information, you should fix that. Or, oh, if this is what they're doing, I could write something way better in my garage, in my PJs at 3 in the morning with a case of Red Bull.
Okay, we have, I've been signaling we have time for one more question, but I've got 3 here, so let me see if I can.
Bring them all together.
I'm going to bring them all together. The general topic is the pilot program. Okay. Size, scope, where are we in that? And because you mentioned reserve component members, are they part of that pilot program? Are you taking into consideration, you know, some of the factors you alluded to, that their lives are different?
Yep. Okay. The size and scope. Well, we haven't actually sized from a contractual scope standpoint with regard to the number of travelers who will or will not be into it. We're effectively going out and trying to find populations that are interested. And when I say that, everybody is interested. I get calls from the most random people across the pyramid of the organization of DoD saying, how can I get my folks in this pilot? Part of it is, what accounting system are you on? Part of it is, what kind of travelers are we talking about? So from the scope side, as I said, we haven't had many people go through. I mean, I'm trying to get to 1,000. We are nowhere near 1,000. We're more on like the 1. That's with regard to end-to-end, the full thing. But in all fairness, we just got our DFAS approval to do that at full end-to-end in a production environment just a couple weeks ago. So we are moving to ramp that up. The DDS is getting loaded into the system as we speak, and we are moving our money over to be able to use the system. Our accounting system wasn't on there. But the reserve piece is really interesting. So I was out in LA doing one of my other jobs for DDS, which was looking at the next generation GPS system, their acquisition. And I was asked to come to speak at a Air Force Reserve, Air Force Guard, National Guard meeting in Alabama, like 12 hours later. I didn't really want to do it, but the guy asked really nicely. So I hopped on a red eye, and I arrived a couple hours early and slept in my car for about an hour. And then I went in there and realized there was a whole bunch of like 2- and 3-star generals sitting around a table trying to figure out how they can improve the life of Air Guard and Air Reservists. And there was this one gentleman in particular, and I won't say his name so you guys don't start harassing him, but he was like, this is awesome. I want every part of this. I will sign up every single one of my men. And he just sat there and told me all of the things that make this particular problem so much worse for him than for everybody else. Fortunately, they're on the Deems accounting system, which is one of the ones on our roadmap, and I am trying very hard to move that to be much sooner, because I think that population is actually the perfect population for us to test with. So I think I'm out of time, but you won't miss me, because I think I'm going to be right there in about 2 minutes. So. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thanks, Jonathan. That was really awesome, and we really appreciate you sticking around. You all have done so great this morning that we're going to take a quick 15-minute unscheduled break while we reset the panel. We'll reconvene at 10 o'clock sharp, so stretch in place or bio break or recharge your cup of coffee, whatever you like, but we'll get back in session at 10 o'clock sharp. Thank you.
can I get down so I can? I like the way you work it. I like to bag it up. I like the way you work it. I like the way you work it. I like the way you work it. Ooh.
Can't explain all the ways that you're making me feel. My heart's in overdrive and you're behind the steering wheel. Touching you, touching me, touching you, touching me. Touching you, ba ba ba.
Down, swing your partner round and round. End of the night is going down. One more shot, another round. End of the night it's going down. I'm yelling timber, you better move, you better dance. Let's make a night you won't remember. I'll be the one you won't forget. It's going down. I'm yelling timber. You better move. You better dance. Let's make a night you won't remember. I'll be the one you won't forget. Whoa, you won't forget.
You say you wanna stay by my side.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you'd like to find your seats, we'll go ahead and get started for the next segment.
All right, I get in trouble if I pull my shades out of the pocket.
Let's give them a second.
Yeah.
Cat's in.
Hey, Phil, I got to do this to actually see your face.
Yeah, kind of, when I was standing making my opening comments, it was, so I just looked left, right, naturally.
Thought I was going to play the water role, but it looks like everybody has some.
Everybody has some. We're all good.
I was trying to find myself a second job.
Oh, they're doing the chimes out there, awful fancy.
Come on down.
Mm-hmm.
I got short legs. These chairs are too big.
Yeah, I can see that. Mansell's always serious.
Kind of feels like being in the zoo.
Kinda. Do we
Yep,
have a
I
wheel
said the same thing.
or is it plugged in?
Start throwing bananas at us? Or,
As long as they're not rotten bananas.
Yeah.
Oh, you can see it. So maybe I should stand up.
Which is always a possibility.
Hey, you can't see
Okay,
the
good morning,
front
folks.
glass.
We'll go ahead and reconvene.
They should have shifted it a little further down.
I'm now going to welcome a distinguished panel of experts. You all are experts, in case you didn't know that. To join us here on the stage for some additional perspectives and a deeper dive into some of the areas that Jonathan discussed in his remarks regarding travel system modernization. We're going to be able to drill down a little bit into some specific areas. As I said, Jonathan has agreed to stick around and moderate this panel, so without further ado, back over to you, sir.
Okay, it's good to see you again. I am going to allow each of our experts introduce themselves. So we'll go ahead and start with you, Mr. Booth.
Okay, I'm Bill Booth. I'm anything but an expert, but I have been around a long time. I started my government service on 15 September 1973 when I came on active duty in the United States Air Force. I've either been an Air Force civilian or now in DOD continuously. Since 73, I transitioned from military to being a senior executive civilian. 14 January 2002. I've held multiplicity of jobs. You can read the bio. Longtime DTS user. Now I have a role in DTS operations, which is kind of neat for me.
Mr. Mansell?
Well, thank you. I would also agree I'm a jack of all trades, a master of none. But I've been in the federal government since 1976, and I'll make a shout out for the Army. I did 27 years in the Army. Thank you, thank you. And did 27 years in the Army, a brief stint as a contractor. And for 10 years, I've served as a Department of Defense, Department of Army and Department of Defense civilian, where I've worked primarily in the information management, human resource information management field, My experience here as Director of DTMO, which I assumed on the 31st of October, is primarily the fact that, I'm a customer. I've been a customer for all of my life in terms of traveling, and so I bring that experience to the table. And my wife is the DTA, and so I bring that experience to the table as well. What that essentially means is I get a whole lot of input, often input that I don't want, often all hours of the day and night. And so it has certainly served me well as I have taken on the awesome responsibilities of this position.
Thank you. Mr. Tibbs-Brewer?
Hello, everyone. Marques Tibbs-Brewer, and I'm a little less distinguished than the other two to my right, but I do have a wealth of travel experience. I spent the majority of my career within Department of Homeland Security. Worked in TSA. I was a senior travel official there, basically managing the travel card, system, policy programs, in addition to PCS. So I've got a wealth of travel experience for sure. After leaving TSA, I moved on to DHS to help them prepare for ETS-1. Back with TSA, decommissioned travel manager, implemented ETS-1, decommissioned ETS-1, and then helped DHS implement ETS-2. After getting to DHS and kind of reaching that point, I kind of wanted to figure out what I wanted to really be when I grew up. So I decided to jump the fence commercially and go work for Concur to try and help them get a better understanding of kind of how the government operates and how they can best deliver some value. So now I'm responsible for sales within that particular industry, within DoD, and then federal government civilian.
Congratulations on figuring out what you want to be when you grow up. I'm still working on that one.
Still working on that, John.
Mr. Hay?
Good morning, everybody. My name is Tim Hay, and I'm the lead cooperative development coordinator for NASPO ValuePoint, and I've been with them for about 4 years. Prior to that, I worked for the state of Oregon for almost 14 years, and I oversaw all the state travel contracts. While in Oregon, I got myself affiliated with, then it was called WSCA, which stood for Western States Contracting Alliance, and set up some multi-state travel programs, which include car, hotel, air, and travel management services. You're probably wondering who the heck WSCA is and who NASPO ValuePoint is. We're actually a national purchasing cooperative that is owned and operated by state government, and our main focus is bringing states together to aggregate their purchasing spend to achieve savings and also through efficiencies. So I just want to thank you for allowing me to present today. And also, I am not a former military person, but I would like to thank all of the people who have served our country today as well.
Thank you. And Mr. Kidd?
Hi, I'm Bret Kidd. I'm with Travelport. We provide travel commerce services to travel agencies, airlines, and other members of the travel community. I had a brief bit of government experience, but I was with the least popular part of the government. I served a little bit of time on Capitol Hill very early in my career, which I think then and is now the least popular of all agencies or entities in the government. I did manage to escape, so I moved to the private sector after a few years. I spent much of my career actually in the IT services realm, a lot of that with EDS, who I'm sure a number of you have bumped into over the years. And much of that time at EDS was either in the travel sector or in public sector. And then at Travelport now, I lead the Americas, so responsible for all of our business from South America to North America, or as I've said before, from penguins to polar bears. So.
All right, great. So this is a really interesting panel. I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts, and you all have heard mine, so I'm going to go ahead and ask some questions, but I believe you can still submit questions through the app, and we will get those to the panel as well, so I'd encourage you to do that. But to go ahead and kick things off, I'd like to start with you, Mr. Booth. So it's very easy for the digital service to come in and talk about the way things are done in the industry and how we would like to see the government do it. And I discussed a little bit earlier the thought of modernization and implementing a COTS SaaS solution. But I also implied some of the complexity in the procurement of such. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit from your perspective about how we would go about doing that and the challenges and opportunities that we might face.
Glad to, Jonathan. But before I do that, let me frame where I come from. For 45 years, I was a traveler, a government traveler with DTS. Whatever the systems was before that, didn't worry about management, didn't worry how, just used it. First travel experience was in 1971 when I got a letter from the RODC detachment telling me to go to summer camp in Loring Air Force Base and directing me to take 6 copies of that letter with carbon paper to the SATO office at Moody Air Force Base, Georgia, and to get my tickets, okay? Everything was paper, and you got paper tickets. And later on, I filed a paper voucher. And later on, I had my second travel experience when I came on active duty and went to Tinker Air Force Base, Oklahoma, and then stood at a pay line with a travel voucher with 12 carbon copies, because everyone had to go to a place to finally get paid. And by the way, it was only 94 days after I traveled when I got paid. Great process, right? So Jonathan said something very correctly. DTS does a very good job of doing what it was designed to do. As a traveler, you get paid a whole lot quicker. Okay, so then my career went on, and by the time DTS was fielded, the current system, I'd already transitioned from active duty. I was a senior executive at Headquarters Air Force, and my staff working travel for me was really complaining about DTS. This thing is a piece of, well, they said crap, but you can figure out what crap is. So I'm an unusual guy, I'm a hands-on guy. So the first thing that I did, I says, well, I'll do my own travel for the next trip. No, we can't let you do that. I'll do my own travel for the next trip. And I did that for about a year. And what I found out is DTS wasn't actually that hard to use. You had to be a little computer savvy, and a lot of our people wasn't at that stage. This was 2005-ish, 6 to 7, right back in there. But we got through that. And then, as I told Mr. Mansell, then I had my latest DTS experience yesterday. Okay? When we're trying to travel, and I'm not being allowed to do my travel anymore, and my individual from the staff comes in and says, we can't do that, Mr. Booth. DTS won't let us. Okay? And why wouldn't DTS let us? Well, what had happened, I had a multi-leg trip. Suddenly something changed on the back end of the schedule, and I've got to come back into D.C. late to get to a meeting in the Pentagon late on the day back instead of flying back into Dulles, which is closer to my house, and going home. DTS won't let us just change that last leg. It won't. Why? Well, the real answer is city pairs, okay? But DTS has implemented it. But guess what? I says, well, just do a cancel and an add. And they did. And then me, the customer, gets ticked off because I lost my good seats and ended up in a middle seat, no recline. Isn't DTS a piece of crap? Okay? It obviously really is. Okay, so now you got where I'm coming from. I'm an old guy that the early part of my career actually was in the data systems development business, just to give you that as a young military officer at a place that was once called the Air Force Data Systems Design Center at what was Gunner Air Force, Alabama, and we used to have a saying back then. Systems implement policy. Policy do not drive systems. That was a catchword back then. And that's what DTS does. DTS implements 1,396 pages of JTFR policy, plus, according to my lawyers, another 200 plus pages of appendixes. So really, if you put all this stuff together, it's more like 1,600 pages. And why did that happen, in my view, Bill's view? It happened, and you know, Jonathan's already nailed it to the cross. He's already got it right. It happened because, you know, way back when, there was a small amount of policy, and then we had Phil Benjamin do something traveling that was inappropriate. Okay? Or it could have been Bill Mansell, or it could have been Bill Booth, or it could have been this staff sergeant, this airman, whomever, or a government civilian, and we went and we put in something to make sure that never happens again. And this repeated over the course of decades. And now what you have right now in the Joint Travel Regulation is you have a document that actually conflicts with itself in places. And there's this urge now to go and to modify that. And it's the right thing to do. And that gets to my answer to the question now that Jonathan asked. The very first thing we must do, they've already correctly identified in their sprint. We've got to get the policy simpler. Because if we go with the same policy, and then now, I don't care whether it's Concur or any commercial engine, and then modify that commercial engine to match our policy, you said it, we're right back in the same place. It'll be spiffy, it'll have a beautiful interface, but we'll be in the same place. So here's bottom line. Just recently, and I mean recently, I think it's dated 2 February, there's a new DODI on the Defense Business Systems, 5000.75. And this has been in the works for about 2 years. It started working on this with our friends in OSD when I was in the Air Force about 2 years ago to allow us to accept and bring on defense business systems a little bit different. And it's, maybe digital services had some influence on this. Because what this would allow you to do is, in effect, take your COT solutions off the shelf, do some fin gap analysis, go through a down select process, come up with your best fit, which is not going to be 100%, and then get on with a phase 2 engineering where you look at your government requirement and say, how much of the uniqueness can I take out to match the COT solution without doing custom code? So I think that's how we solve the problem. I think we now going to have the vehicle and acquisition policy that was signed out by Mr. Kendall before he departed. To let us do that, I believe the path that DTMO is on with trying to cut at least 50% out of the JTFR currently is the right path. And of course, being the short timer, having only been in the HRA for 8 months, when I was first briefed on that, I said, and this shocked him, that's a good intermediate goal, so let's get that first half done, do the next half. The simpler we can get the policy, we may not be able to get to, how many was Facebook? 7 pages. Congress will not allow us to get to 7 pages. Okay, they won't. Okay, they won't. It just won't. It's too complex of a legislative process. But we can get a lot tighter on that. And in addition to that, by the way, we have the ability as we go into this way to go back to the Hill and say, these are changes you can make to make it easier for us. I think Jonathan's thing of getting with my friends in the Guard and Reserve is probably a test bed for the expanded scope of the pilot is perfect, because I got a little experience in that area, and many of you probably know this, but for those that don't, the number changes every day because it keeps going up because new statutes gets added. But when I left the Air Force, there was 32 different statuses a Guard and Reserve member could be in. 32. And I have to have a travel system that supports all 32 of those statuses. So, a new way of acquiring software, simplify your requirement. Short answer.
That was a good answer. Thank you. Bill Mansell, if you would, I think that was actually a good dovetail into your area of expertise. I talked a lot about policy. Mr. Mansell implied it as well. And I'd like to hear some of your thoughts. What are some of the opportunities and challenges that we face for implementing a modernized approach, given the current and hopefully future state of policy?
Well, Jonathan, as I listen to your comments, I have concluded that you've already answered my question, so thank you very much. Next question, please.
Have a good day.
Have a good day. Let me, and in many respects you have, but let me try to see if I can add a couple of points to that. First and foremost, I don't know if those of you in the audience are aware of this, but the esteemed gentleman that sits to my right, your left, is my boss. When my boss talks about DTS, I listen. Also, one of the challenges that I encounter in many respects as I go to the various executive forums is that there are strong opinions about DTS. And I have concluded that it's a love-hate situation. The hate is emotional in many respects, and the love, where you have the love, it's conditional love. So it's an interesting situation to be in. But as Jonathan said earlier, and I can tell you that my observation from being in DTMO, it's a great group of people, and they do great work, as Jonathan has acknowledged as well, and that's been my observation. So let's kind of break that down just a bit and just talk briefly about the policy, folks. So I wasn't here when a lot of what Jonathan talked about happened. So I'm giving it to you from an historical perspective, what I heard and perhaps what I observed from the civilian human resources community. But I was in a briefing one day with my policy chief, and he made a comment that has really stuck and resonated with me. And it was, and I'm paraphrasing now, but us policy types are pretty good at writing the policy. We do that well. But what we can read it and we can understand it, and no one else can. And I think that's part of the problem right there. It's written, you know, for them. It's written from their perspective. And so what that means to me is that it's kind of all about change. And Jonathan really did talk about that. It really is about change. For over 50 years, we've had about 100 different policy types writing policy. And so you've already heard the stories. It's complex. Yes, it is. But if you can imagine 50 years of people writing for themselves, not necessarily writing for the users, I think that puts into perspective what the policy, you know, the scope and the challenge of the policy that we have, and why we have actually over 1,600 pages when we started. And so that's part of the problem right there. And so the other issue that was discussed is the impact of that policy. So DTS is really not a bad system. You heard it was written in COBOL code. But my experience with automated systems is that the systems do what the business processes, you know, the codes tell them to do. So if you have complex policies, what does that tell you, you know, about the code and about the language, programming language in the system? And so that's really what drives it. And so that's the challenge as I see it. And so as we try to look at simplifying policy, there are even some other complications as well. One of those is that as you change the policy, you have to make sure that you consider allowances. And I think I lost, okay, got it. Military and civilian allowances are the same. You have to treat civilians and militaries the same when it comes time to looking at and changing their allowances. What that means is that there's a potential for winners and for losers. If we change policy, there's also a challenge with legislation. In many instances, policy stems from legislation. So if you want to change the policy, sometimes you have to change the legislation. What that also means is that sometimes the policy ties into policies of other communities. We talked about the financial management community. So changes that we make in our policy in many instances may very well have to be coordinated with other communities, and we have no control over whether they want to change their policy or not. So that complicates things as well. And then perhaps a final thought with policy and just some of the challenges are that when you look at eliminating some of the challenges that you have, you could eliminate good things, good capabilities. An example of that is the government meal rate program right there. So you have some challenges there that you have to deal with. So on the other hand, where are we going? What's the opportunity? It's kind of been talked about already before. It's really travel simplification. So what is travel simplification? Simplification to me, my perception and my perspective of it from listening to my staff is that essentially it's a construct. It really says we're willing to embrace change. We're willing to take a look at the policies differently from what we have before in the past. We're willing to make them a bit simpler. We're willing to write the policy for the users and not for ourselves. And that's kind of what it's all about. Jonathan talked about the sprint, the discovery sprint, and we're very thankful. I'm very thankful, even though I wasn't here at the particular time, to USDS in highlighting the travel simplification piece, getting it the visibility that it needed, getting the resources that it needed, so that we could move forward with our policy simplification effort. And that is manifested by the JTR rewrite. So you've heard the discussion on it before. You know exactly where it's going. It's simplifying policy and whatever, but there are a couple of specific things. Jonathan talked about 168 reasons for TDY. We've actually taken that and broken it down into 5 broad categories. We're standardizing allowances where the law permits. We're standardizing terminology. We're applying the federal plain language guidelines. What that means is a simple English for our policy. And we're going to try to cut the TDY page count in half. Matter of fact, we have cut the TDY page count in half. So I think, as has been said by the esteemed individuals before me, that we're moving in the right direction. We anticipate having the first 3 chapters of the JTR on the street in April, and we anticipate having the entire JTR rewrite, and I'll say phase 1 because I think it's a continuous process. We're going to learn from what we do here, and we'll continue to refine our policy and make it even better over time. But iteration 1 will be done by the end of September, assuming all things go right. So we're moving everything in the right direction. And so how does that compare to the pilot? So I just want to briefly talk adopt versus adapt. One of the things that I learned in my experience in the past with bringing systems on board, when you compare what's in a system and you look at what the policy says, you have to make the determination, does that system, do you adopt the business rules of that system, or do you adapt the system to meet the policy in place? And so that is the challenge. And so the simpler the policy is, hopefully, in theory, you reduce the gap that exists between any COTS product that you are evaluating and what's in the policy. And as you learn and then you do the back and forth and you evaluate the gap, like I say, there's an iterative process that goes on here. And so maybe today there may be some differences and there may be a gap, but we'll identify what those gaps are. Hopefully there won't be many gaps, and we can work on them, and we can determine which direction we want to move in. And so from that perspective, it's all about configuring the application versus customizing the application. And our travel simplification process, I hope, will enable that. So in a nutshell, Jonathan, I think I'm endorsing everything that you've said, but I agree, and that's the direction that we're headed in.
Great, thanks. I appreciate the in-depth context from both of you. We're going to shift gears here a little bit, and I'm going to ask Marques a question. And I would just like to say, you know, Marques said the word sales in his title, but I don't actually think of Marques like that. He always gives me the straight truth as I want to hear, not what I want to hear, but I want to hear the straight truth. And so I'm going to ask you probably a difficult question, but I talked to Tim Burke, who is probably out here somewhere, who's the category manager for civilian travel rather often. And we sort of waxed philosophical about what we're doing and how Concur's commercial version versus their government version fare. And that's where the sales part may make the answering this tricky for you. But I would just like to hear your thoughts. I mean, given the backdrop that you just heard regarding what are the values and virtues of the commercial product over potentially the government product, and how do we implement it? I mean, you've heard the policy challenges, you've heard sort of the kind of deep challenges we face. How do you think we could implement commercial solutions to these problems?
So I think there's a lot of benefits to what the government is doing in looking at the commercial products. I mean, you look at some of the standard benefits of low initial cost to roll out, the speed in which you can deploy the products. But I really think you have to think further than that, right? So you have to find a product and a service and a provider that really looks at how do we solve today's issues and how do we meet today's needs, but also consider and grow with that particular organization to solve tomorrow's issues as well. And it's not just what is the policy changes happening with internal to the government, but it's also what's happening in industry, right? So it's not just that the government rules change or the policies change, it's the fact that travel changes. I mean, the industry is very fluid, and as we go to this technology age and we're moving in that direction, there's quite a bit of innovation that can take place with the commercial product that you can't necessarily do with a customized product specifically for a particular industry. You talk about innovation, right? So think about it this way. Everybody has a mobile device in here, I'm pretty sure, of some type. I mean, if you think about it, what's really more mobile than travel? So if you have the ability to capture expenses on the fly, you have the ability to take quick snapshots of receipts, you have the ability to enter your expenses while you're on the go, that equals quite a bit more transparency and a little bit more accuracy. But let's even think further than that. You talk about a self-writing expense report that takes information and data from card swipes or directly pushed into the system from hoteliers that have the receipts there. Now you have a very accurate document that really gives, first, the user experience you're looking for because the user has to take minimal actions in the system, but also you get a benefit on the back end with the business part of it to say, now I've got efficiency, my folks can travel and focus on what they need to do in regards to mission. But you also have a more compliant document that says, okay, now improper payments go out of the window because everything that's in that document is really pushed into the system. There's no errors from a manual entry standpoint. So there's a lot of benefits that you get from using a commercial solution that involves that innovation that you really need. The government's requirements are constantly changing, but the people that are supporting our government entities, they're changing as well. I mean, you have a shift going on right now from baby boomers to Gen X and afterward. Those folks have certain expectations, and they want their travel to be very reminiscent of what they see in their personal travel, not a complex system that may be built upon old technology. So if you look at it from that standpoint, there's some benefits to that. You look at with the commercial product, how do you balance user experience with policy compliance? And that's where you have to really find a partner and really find a product that allows you to do that. I don't think there's any optimal COTS product that just simply will meet your needs for the long term. You really have to grow with it. I think the second part of it, and you mentioned this earlier, Jonathan, how does the government challenge itself? One of the things that Concur's built is an ecosystem that brings in customers, stakeholders, vendors, technology companies all into one room to talk about exactly where is travel going. Where do we need to be? And it allows for all the parties involved in the entire supply chain to say, these are the ways that we really make this travel thing work for all parties involved. Government gets what it needs, a fully functional, easy to use product that helps it manage its travel effectively. It brings data into the system for everyone to use, as you mentioned earlier, that's applicable to government and also available to industry to make sure that we fully understand what are we targeting when we start talking about these changes within government to say, how do we become a more user-friendly organization and group to get the full benefits that you would get from a COTS product. I think those things are really important, and I think that data piece will help to really drive what changes we make. And we have to do that objectively. It can't be, we've done this forever, so we're going to continue to do it. It really has to be, here's the data, here's what the information tells us, here's what the trends are telling us, how do we become most effective, and then how do we take that information, digest it, and use it.
Great, thank you. Tim, your background is extremely interesting to me. I'd love to learn from your perspective and some of the experiences you've had, I'm sure tackling similar types of problems, dealing with states. What have you seen there? What are some lessons learned that you have? What's some advice you could give the rest of us? And what are some of the accomplishments you had and challenges you face?
Lots of patience. One of the biggest challenges that we have is, there's one federal government, but there's 50 individual state governments, and they all have different rules and processes and policies. So trying to bring a travel program together that meets the needs of all of those 50 states out there can be a challenge. One of the things that really sets our cooperative apart from a lot of the other purchasing cooperatives out there is we use what we call a lead state model, where we have one state that takes the lead in an initiative. In this case, Oregon led the travel contracts, and we have multiple states that work together in the development of those travel RFPs. And then also in the evaluation of the awards, and also the administration of the contracts as well. That has probably led to the success of the first travel contract that we put together, which was the car rental contracts. And we have 2 contractors under contract right now. We have about 27 states utilizing that program. And that was kind of built the foundation for what we did moving forward. A lot of state governments, some state governments have adopted a managed travel program. A lot of state governments haven't adopted a managed travel program yet. There's only a handful of states that really truly have a true managed travel program. And so trying to get those states on board, to come on board, has been kind of a challenge. It's kind of, I'm kind of in a unique spot because I represent state government. I work with state governments in the development of those contracts, but then we also kind of wear a sales